Chapter 4. Diver. The week passed away. On the Saturday it rained, a soft drizzling rain that held off at times. In one of the intervals Gudrun and Ursula set out for a walk, going towards Willy Water. The atmosphere was grey and translucent, the birds sang sharply on the young twigs, the earth would be quickening and hastening in growth. The two girls walked swiftly, gladly, because of the soft, subtle rush of morning that filled the wet haze. By the road the blackthorn was in blossom, white and wet, its tiny amber grains burning faintly in the white smoke of blossom. Purple twigs were darkly luminous in the grey air, high hedges glowed like living shadows, hovering nearer, coming into creation. The morning was full of a new creation. When the sisters came to Willy Water, the lake lay all grey and visionary, stretching into the moist, translucent vista of trees and meadow. Fine electric activity and sound came from the dumbbells below the road, the birds piping one against the other, and water mysteriously plashing, issuing from the lake. The two girls drifted swiftly along. In front of them, at the corner of the lake, near the road, was a mossy boathouse under a walnut tree, and a little landing stage where a boat was moored, wavering like a shadow on the still grey water, below the green, decayed poles. All was shadowy with coming summer. Suddenly, from the boathouse, a white figure ran out, frightening in its swift sharp transit, across the old landing stage. It launched in a white arc through the air, there was a bursting of the water, and among the smooth ripples a swimmer was making out to space, in a center of faintly heaving motion. The whole other world, wet and remote, he had to himself. He could move into the pure translucency of the grey, uncreated water. Gudrun stood by the stone wall, watching. "How I envy him," she said, in low, desirous tones. "Ugh!" shivered Ursula. "So cold." "Yes, but how good, how really fine, to swim out there." The sisters stood watching the swimmer move further into the grey, moist, full space of the water, pulsing with his own small, invading motion, and arched over with mist and dim woods. "Don't you wish it were you?" asked Gudrun, looking at Ursula. "I do," said Ursula. "But I'm not sure, it's so wet." "No," said Gudrun, reluctantly. She stood watching the motion on the bosom of the water, as if fascinated. He, having swum a certain distance, turned round and was swimming on his back, looking along the water at the two girls by the wall. In the faint wash of motion, they could see his ruddy face, and could feel him watching them. "It is Gerald Crich," said Ursula. "I know," replied Gudrun. And she stood motionless gazing over the water at the face which washed up and down on the flood, as he swam steadily. From his separate element he saw them and he exulted to himself because of his own advantage, his possession of a world to himself. He was immune and perfect. He loved his own vigorous, thrusting motion, and the violent impulse of the very cold water against his limbs, buoying him up. He could see the girls watching him away off, outside, and that pleased him. He lifted his arm from the water, in a sign to them. "He is waving," said Ursula. "Yes," replied Gudrun. They watched him. He waved again, with a strange movement of recognition across the difference. "Like a Nibelung," laughed Ursula. Gudrun said nothing, only stood still looking over the water. Gerald suddenly turned, and was swimming away swiftly, with a side stroke. He was alone now, alone and immune in the middle of the waters, which he had all to himself. He exulted in his isolation in the new element, unquestioned and unconditioned. He was happy, thrusting with his legs and all his body, without bond or connection anywhere, just himself in the watery world. Gudrun envied him almost painfully. Even this momentary possession of pure isolation and fluidity seemed to her so terribly desirable that she felt herself as if damned, out there on the high road. "God, what it is to be a man!" she cried. "What?" exclaimed Ursula in surprise. "The freedom, the liberty, the mobility," cried Gudrun, strangely flushed and brilliant. "You are a man, you want to do a thing, you do it. You haven't the 1,000 obstacles a woman has in front of her." Ursula wondered what was in Gudrun's mind, to occasion this outburst. She could not understand. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "Nothing," cried Gudrun, in swift refutation. "But supposing I did? Supposing I want to swim up that water? It is impossible, it is one of the impossibilities of life, for me to take my clothes off now and jump in. But isn't it ridiculous? Doesn't it simply prevent our living?" She was so hot, so flushed, so furious, that Ursula was puzzled. The two sisters went on, up the road. They were passing between the trees just below Shortlands. They looked up at the long, low house, dim and glamorous in the wet morning, its cedar trees slanting before the windows. Gudrun seemed to be studying it closely. "Don't you think it's attractive, Ursula?" asked Gudrun. "Very," said Ursula. "Very peaceful and charming. It has form, too, it has a period." "What period?" "Oh, 18th century, for certain, Dorothy Wordsworth and Jane Austen, don't you think?" Ursula laughed. "Don't you think so?" repeated Gudrun. "Perhaps. But I don't think the Criches fit the period. I know Gerald is putting in a private electric plant, for lighting the house, and is making all kinds of latest improvements." Gudrun shrugged her shoulders swiftly. "Of course," she said, "that's quite inevitable." "Quite," laughed Ursula. "He is several generations of youngness at one go. They hate him for it. He takes them all by the scruff of the neck, and fairly flings them along. He'll have to die soon, when he's made every possible improvement, and there will be nothing more to improve. He's got go, anyhow." "Certainly, he's got go," said Gudrun. "In fact, I've never seen a man that showed signs of so much. The unfortunate thing is, where does his go to, what becomes of it?" "Oh, I know," said Ursula. "It goes in applying the latest appliances." "Exactly," said Gudrun. "You know he shot his brother?" said Ursula. "Shot his brother?" cried Gudrun, frowning as if in disapprobation. "Didn't you know?" "Oh yes!" "I thought you knew. He and his brother were playing together with a gun. He told his brother to look down the gun, and it was loaded, and blew the top of his head off. Isn't it a horrible story?" "How fearful!" cried Gudrun. "But it is long ago?" "Oh yes, they were quite boys," said Ursula. "I think it is one of the most horrible stories I know. And he of course did not know that the gun was loaded?" "Yes. You see, it was an old thing that had been lying in the stable for years. Nobody dreamed it would ever go off, and of course, no one imagined it was loaded. But isn't it dreadful, that it should happen?" "Frightful!" cried Gudrun. "And isn't it horrible too to think of such a thing happening to one, when one was a child, and having to carry the responsibility of it all through one's life? Imagine it, two boys playing together, then this comes upon them, for no reason whatever, out of the air. Ursula, it's very frightening. Oh, it's one of the things I can't bear. Murder, that is thinkable, because there's a will behind it. But a thing like that to happen to one, perhaps there was an unconscious will behind it," said Ursula. "This playing at killing has some primitive desire for killing in it, don't you think?" "Desire?" said Gudrun, coldly, stiffening a little. "I can't see that they were even playing at killing. I suppose one boy said to the other, 'You look down the barrel while I pull the trigger, and see what happens.' It seems to me the purest form of accident." "No," said Ursula. "I couldn't pull the trigger of the emptiest gun in the world, not if someone were looking down the barrel. One instinctively doesn't do it, one can't." Gudrun was silent for some moments, in sharp disagreement. "Of course," she said coldly. "If one is a woman, and grown up, one's instinct prevents one. But I cannot see how that applies to a couple of boys playing together." Her voice was cold and angry. "Yes," persisted Ursula. At that moment they heard a woman's voice a few yards off say loudly, "Oh, damn the thing." They went forward and saw Laura Crich and Hermione Rodis in the field on the other side of the hedge, and Laura Crich struggling with the gate, to get out. Ursula at once hurried up and helped to lift the gate. "Thanks so much," said Laura, looking up flushed and Amazon-like, yet rather confused. "It isn't right on the hinges." "No," said Ursula. "And they're so heavy." "Surprising!" cried Laura. "How do you do?" sang Hermione, from out of the field, the moment she could make her voice heard. "It's nice now. Are you going for a walk?" "Yes. Isn't the young green beautiful?" "So beautiful, quite burning." Good morning, you'll come and see me?" "Thank you so much, next week, yes, goodbye, Goodbye." Gudrun and Ursula stood and watched her slowly waving her head up and down, and waving her hand slowly in dismissal, smiling a strange affected smile, making a tall queer, frightening figure, with her heavy fair hair slipping to her eyes. Then they moved off, as if they had been dismissed like inferiors. The four women parted. As soon as they had gone far enough, Ursula said, her cheeks burning, "I do think she's impudent." "Who, Hermione Rodgers?" asked Gudrun. "Why? The way she treats one, impudence." "Why, Ursula, what did you notice that was so impudent?" asked Gudrun rather coldly. "Her whole manner." "Oh, it's impossible, the way she tries to bully one. Pure bullying. She's an impudent woman. You'll come and see me, as if we should be falling over ourselves for the privilege." "I can't understand, Ursula, what you are so much put out about," said Gudrun, in some exasperation. "One knows those women are impudent, these free women who have emancipated themselves from the aristocracy. But it is so unnecessary, so vulgar," cried Ursula. "No, I don't see it. And if I did, pour moi, elle n'existe pas. I don't grant her the power to be impudent to me." "Do you think she likes you?" asked Ursula. "Well, no, I shouldn't think she did." "Then why does she ask you to go to Bredleby and stay with her?" Gudrun lifted her shoulders in a low shrug. "After all, she's got the sense to know we're not just the ordinary run," said Gudrun. "Whatever she is, she's not a fool. And I'd rather have somebody I detested, than the ordinary woman who keeps to her own set. Hermione Rodgers does risk herself in some respects." Ursula pondered this for a time. "I doubt it," she replied. "Really, she risks nothing. I suppose we ought to admire her for knowing she can invite us, school teachers, and risk nothing." "Precisely," said Gudrun. "Think of the myriads of women that daren't do it. She makes the most of her privileges, that's something. I suppose, really, we should do the same, in her place." "No," said Ursula. "No. It would bore me. I couldn't spend my time playing her games. It's infra-dig." The two sisters were like a pair of scissors, snipping off everything that came athwart them, or like a knife and a whetstone, the one sharpened against the other. "Of course," cried Ursula suddenly, "she ought to thank her stars if we will go and see her. You are perfectly beautiful, 1,000 times more beautiful than ever she is or was, and to my thinking, 1,000 times more beautifully dressed, for she never looks fresh and natural, like a flower, always old, thought out, and we are more intelligent than most people." "Undoubtedly," said Gudrun. "And it ought to be admitted, simply," said Ursula. "Certainly it ought," said Gudrun. "But you'll find that the really chic thing is to be so absolutely ordinary, so perfectly commonplace and like the person in the street, that you really are a masterpiece of humanity, not the person in the street actually, but the artistic creation of her." "How awful!" cried Ursula. "Yes, Ursula, it is awful, in most respects. You daren't be anything that isn't amazingly éter, so much éter that it is the artistic creation of ordinariness. It's very dull to create oneself into nothing better," laughed Ursula. "Very dull," retorted Gudrun. "Really, Ursula, it is dull, that's just the word. One longs to be high-flown, and make speeches like Corneille, after it." Gudrun was becoming flushed and excited over her own cleverness. "Strut," said Ursula. "One wants to strut, to be a swan among geese." "Exactly," cried Gudrun, "a swan among geese." "They are all so busy playing the ugly duckling," cried Ursula, with mocking laughter. "And I don't feel a bit like a humble and pathetic ugly duckling." I do feel like a swan among geese, I can't help it. They make one feel so. And I don't care what they think of me. Fame fiche. Gudrun looked up at Ursula with a queer, uncertain envy and dislike. Of course, the only thing to do is to despise them all, just all, she said. The sisters went home again, to read and talk and work, and wait for Monday, for school. Ursula often wondered what else she waited for, besides the beginning and end of the school week, and the beginning and end of the holidays. This was a whole life. Sometimes she had periods of tight horror, when it seemed to her that her life would pass away, and be gone, without having been more than this. But she never really accepted it. Her spirit was active, her life like a shoot that is growing steadily, but which has not yet come above ground. Chapter 5. In the train. One day at this time Birkin was called to London. He was not very fixed in his abode. He had rooms in Nottingham, because his work lay chiefly in that town. But often he was in London, or in Oxford. He moved about a great deal, his life seemed uncertain, without any definite rhythm, any organic meaning. On the platform of the railway station he saw Gerald Crich, reading a newspaper, and evidently waiting for the train. Birkin stood some distance off, among the people. It was against his instinct to approach anybody. From time to time, in a manner characteristic of him, Gerald lifted his head and looked round. Even though he was reading the newspaper closely, he must keep a watchful eye on his external surroundings. There seemed to be a dual consciousness running in him. He was thinking vigorously of something he read in the newspaper, and at the same time his eye ran over the surfaces of the life round him, and he missed nothing. Birkin, who was watching him, was irritated by his duality. He noticed too, that Gerald seemed always to be at bay against everybody, in spite of his queer, genial, social manner when roused. Now Birkin started violently at seeing this genial look flash onto Gerald's face, at seeing Gerald approaching with hand outstretched. "Hello, Rupert, where are you going?" "London." "So are you, I suppose?" "Yes." Gerald's eyes went over Birkin's face in curiosity. "We'll travel together if you like," he said. "Don't you usually go first?" asked Birkin. "I can't stand the crowd," replied Gerald. "But third'll be all right. There's a restaurant car, we can have some tea." The two men looked at the station clock, having nothing further to say. "What were you reading in the paper?" Birkin asked. Gerald looked at him quickly. "Isn't it funny, what they do put in the newspapers," he said. "Here are two leaders." He held out his Daily Telegraph, full of the ordinary newspaper cant. He scanned the columns down, and then there's this little, I dunno what you'd call it, essay, almost, appearing with the leaders, and saying there must arise a man who will give new values to things, give us new truths, a new attitude to life, or else we shall be a crumbling nothingness in a few years, a country in ruin. "I suppose that's a bit of newspaper cant, as well," said Birkin. "It sounds as if the man meant it, and quite genuinely," said Gerald. "Give it to me," said Birkin, holding out his hand for the paper. The train came, and they went on board, sitting on either side a little table, by the window, in the restaurant car. Birkin glanced over his paper, then looked up at Gerald, who was waiting for him. "I believe the man means it," he said, "as far as he means anything." "And do you think it's true? Do you think we really want a new gospel?" asked Gerald. Birkin shrugged his shoulders. "I think the people who say they want a new religion are the last to accept anything new. They want novelty right enough. But to stare straight at this life that we've brought upon ourselves, and reject it, absolutely smash up the old idols of ourselves, that we'll never do. You've got very badly to want to get rid of the old, before anything new will appear, even in the self." Gerald watched him closely. "You think we ought to break up this life, just start and let fly?" he asked. "This life? Yes, I do. We've got to bust it completely, or shrivel inside it, as in a tight skin. For it won't expand any more." There was a queer little smile in Gerald's eyes, a look of amusement, calm and curious. And how do you propose to begin? I suppose you mean, reform the whole order of society? He asked. Birkin had a slight, tense frown between the brows. He too was impatient of the conversation. I don't propose at all, he replied. When we really want to go for something better, we shall smash the old. Until then, any sort of proposal, or making proposals, is no more than a tiresome game for self-important people. The little smile began to die out of Gerald's eyes, and he said, looking with a cool stare at Birkin, so you really think things are very bad? Completely bad. The smile appeared again. In what way? Every way, said Birkin. We are such dreary liars. Our one idea is to lie to ourselves. We have an ideal of a perfect world, clean and straight and sufficient. So we cover the earth with foulness. Life is a blotch of labor, like insects scurrying in filth, so that your collier can have a pianoforte in his parlor, and you can have a butler and a motor car in your up-to-date house, and as a nation we can sport the Ritz, or the Empire, Gabby Deasley's and the Sunday newspapers. It is very dreary. Gerald took a little time to readjust himself after this tirade. Would you have us live without houses, return to nature? He asked. I would have nothing at all. People only do what they want to do, and what they are capable of doing. If they were capable of anything else, there would be something else. Again Gerald pondered. He was not going to take offense at Birkin. Don't you think the collier's pianoforte, as you call it, is a symbol for something very real, a real desire for something higher, in the collier's life? Higher? Cried Birkin. Yes. Amazing heights of upright grandeur. It makes him so much higher in his neighboring collier's eyes. He sees himself reflected in the neighboring opinion, like in a Brocken mist, several feet taller on the strength of the pianoforte, and he is satisfied. He lives for the sake of that Brocken spectre, the reflection of himself in the human opinion. You do the same. If you are of high importance to humanity, you are of high importance to yourself. That is why you work so hard at the mines. If you can produce coal to cook 5,000 dinners a day, you are 5,000 times more important than if you cooked only your own dinner. I suppose I am, laughed Gerald. Can't you see, said Birkin, that to help my neighbor to eat is no more than eating myself. I eat, thou eatest, he eats, we eat, you eat, they eat, and what then? Why should every man decline the whole verb? First person singular is enough for me. You've got to start with material things, said Gerald. Which statement Birkin ignored. And we've got to live for something, we're not just cattle that can graze and have done with it, said Gerald. Tell me, said Birkin. What do you live for? Gerald's face went baffled. What do I live for? He repeated. I suppose I live to work, to produce something, insofar as I am a purposive being. Apart from that, I live because I am living. And what's your work? Getting so many more thousands of tons of coal out of the earth every day. And when we've got all the coal we want, and all the plush furniture, and pianofortes, and the rabbits are all stewed and eaten, and we're all warm and our bellies are filled and we're listening to the young lady performing on the pianoforte, what then? What then, when you've made a real fair start with your material things? Gerald sat laughing at the words and the mocking humor of the other man. But he was cogitating too. We haven't got there yet, he replied. A good many people are still waiting for the rabbit and the fire to cook it. So while you get the coal I must chase the rabbit? Said Birkin, mocking at Gerald. Something like that, said Gerald. Birkin watched him narrowly. He saw the perfect good-humored callousness, even strange, glistening malice, in Gerald, glistening through the plausible ethics of productivity. Gerald, he said, I rather hate you. I know you do, said Gerald. Why do you? Birkin mused inscrutably for some minutes. I should like to know if you are conscious of hating me, he said at last. Do you ever consciously detest me, hate me with mystic hate? There are odd moments when I hate you starrily. Gerald was rather taken aback, even a little disconcerted. He did not quite know what to say. I may, of course, hate you sometimes," he said. "But I'm not aware of it, never acutely aware of it, that is." "So much the worse," said Birkin. Gerald watched him with curious eyes. He could not quite make him out. "So much the worse, is it?" he repeated. There was a silence between the two men for some time, as the train ran on. In Birkin's face was a little irritable tension, a sharp knitting of the brows, keen and difficult. Gerald watched him warily, carefully, rather calculatingly, for he could not decide what he was after. Suddenly Birkin's eyes looked straight and overpowering into those of the other man. "What do you think is the aim and object of your life, Gerald?" he asked. Again Gerald was taken aback. He could not think what his friend was getting at. Was he poking fun, or not? "At this moment, I couldn't say offhand," he replied, with faintly ironic humor. "Do you think love is the be-all and the end-all of life?" Birkin asked, with direct, attentive seriousness. "Of my own life?" said Gerald. "Yes." There was a really puzzled pause. "I can't say," said Gerald. "It hasn't been, so far." "What has your life been, so far?" "Oh, finding out things for myself, and getting experiences, and making things go." Birkin knitted his brows like sharply molded steel. "I find," he said, "that one needs some one really pure single activity. I should call love a single pure activity. But I don't really love anybody, not now." "Have you ever really loved anybody?" asked Gerald. "Yes and no," replied Birkin. "Not finally," said Gerald. Finally, no," said Birkin. "Nor I," said Gerald. "And do you want to?" said Birkin. Gerald looked with a long, twinkling, almost sardonic look into the eyes of the other man. "I don't know," he said. "I do, I want to love," said Birkin. "You do?" "Yes. I want the finality of love." "The finality of love," repeated Gerald. And he waited for a moment. "Just one woman?" he added. The evening light, flooding yellow along the fields, lit up Birkin's face with a tense, abstract steadfastness. Gerald still could not make it out. "Yes, one woman," said Birkin. But to Gerald it sounded as if he were insistent rather than confident. "I don't believe a woman, and nothing but a woman, will ever make my life," said Gerald. "Not the center and core of it, the love between you and a woman?" asked Birkin. Gerald's eyes narrowed with a queer dangerous smile as he watched the other man. "I never quite feel it that way," he said. "You don't? Then wherein does life center, for you?" "I don't know, that's what I want somebody to tell me. As far as I can make out, it doesn't center at all. It is artificially held together by the social mechanism." Birkin pondered as if he would crack something. "I know," he said, "it just doesn't center. The old ideals are dead as nails, nothing there. It seems to me there remains only this perfect union with a woman, sort of ultimate marriage, and there isn't anything else." Do you mean if there isn't the woman, there's nothing?" said Gerald. "Pretty well that, seeing there's no God." "Then we're hard put to it," said Gerald. And he turned to look out of the window at the flying, golden landscape. Birkin could not help seeing how beautiful and soldierly his face was, with a certain courage to be indifferent. "You think it's heavy odds against us?" said Birkin. "If we've got to make our life up out of a woman, one woman, woman only, yes, I do," said Gerald. "I don't believe I shall ever make up my life, at that rate." Birkin watched him almost angrily. "You are a born unbeliever," he said. "I only feel what I feel," said Gerald. And he looked again at Birkin almost sardonically, with his blue, manly, sharp-lighted eyes. Birkin's eyes were at the moment full of anger. But swiftly they became troubled, doubtful, then full of a warm, rich affectionateness and laughter. "It troubles me very much, Gerald," he said, wrinkling his brows. "I can see it does," said Gerald, uncovering his mouth in a manly, quick, soldierly laugh. Gerald was held unconsciously by the other man. He wanted to be near him, he wanted to be within his sphere of influence. There was something very congenial to him in Birkin. But yet, beyond this, he did not take much notice. He felt that he, himself, Gerald, had harder and more durable truths than any the other man knew. He felt himself older, more knowing. It was the quick changing warmth and venality and brilliant warm utterance he loved in his friend. It was the rich play of words and quick interchange of feelings he enjoyed. The real content of the words he never really considered, he himself knew better. Birkin knew this. He knew that Gerald wanted to be fond of him without taking him seriously. And this made him go hard and cold. As the train ran on, he sat looking at the land, and Gerald fell away, became as nothing to him. Birkin looked at the land, at the evening, and was thinking, well, if mankind is destroyed, if our race is destroyed like Sodom, and there is this beautiful evening with the luminous land and trees, I am satisfied. That which informs it all is there, and can never be lost. After all, what is mankind but just one expression of the incomprehensible? And if mankind passes away, it will only mean that this particular expression is completed and done. That which is expressed, and that which is to be expressed, cannot be diminished. There it is, in the shining evening. Let mankind pass away, time it did. The creative utterances will not cease, they will only be there. Humanity doesn't embody the utterance of the incomprehensible anymore. Humanity is a dead letter. There will be a new embodiment, in a new way. Let humanity disappear as quick as possible. Gerald interrupted him by asking, "Where are you staying in London?" Birkin looked up. "With a man in Soho. I pay part of the rent of a flat, and stop there when I like." "Good idea, have a place more or less your own," said Gerald. "Yes. But I don't care for it much. I'm tired of the people I am bound to find there." "What kind of people?" "Art, music, London bohemia, the most pettifogging calculating bohemia that ever reckoned its pennies. But there are a few decent people, decent in some respects. They are really very thorough rejectors of the world, perhaps they live only in the gesture of rejection and negation, but negatively something, at any rate." "What are they? Painters, musicians?" "Painters, musicians, writers, hangers-on, models, advanced young people, anybody who is openly at outs with the conventions, and belongs to nowhere particularly. They are often young fellows down from the university, and girls who are living their own lives, as they say." "All loose?" said Gerald. Birkin could see his curiosity roused. "In one way. Most bound, in another. For all their shockingness, all on one note." He looked at Gerald, and saw how his blue eyes were lit up with a little flame of curious desire. He saw too how good-looking he was. Gerald was attractive, his blood seemed fluid and electric. His blue eyes burned with a keen, yet cold light, there was a certain beauty, a beautiful passivity in all his body, his molding. "We might see something of each other. I am in London for 2 or 3 days, said Gerald. "Yes," said Birkin, "I don't want to go to the theatre, or the music hall. You'd better come round to the flat, and see what you can make of Halliday and his crowd." "Thanks, I should like to," laughed Gerald. "What are you doing tonight?" "I promised to meet Halliday at the Pompadour. It's a bad place, but there is nowhere else." "Where is it?" asked Gerald. "Piccadilly Circus." "Oh yes, well, shall I come round there?" "By all means, it might amuse you." The evening was falling. They had passed Bedford. Birkin watched the country, and was filled with a sort of hopelessness. He always felt this, on approaching London. His dislike of mankind, of the mass of mankind, amounted almost to an illness. "Where the quiet-colored end of evening smiles miles and miles," he was murmuring to himself, like a man condemned to death. Gerald, who was very subtly alert, wary in all his senses, leaned forward and asked smilingly, "What were you saying?" Birkin glanced at him, laughed, and repeated, "Where the quiet-colored end of evening smiles, miles and miles, over pastures where the something sheep half asleep." Gerald also looked now at the country. And Birkin, who, for some reason was now tired and dispirited, said to him, "I always feel doomed when the train is running into London. I feel such a despair, so hopeless, as if it were the end of the world." "Really?" said Gerald. "Does the end of the world frighten you?" Birkin lifted his shoulders in a slow shrug. "I don't know," he said. "It does while it hangs imminent and doesn't fall. But people give me a bad feeling, very bad." There was a roused glad smile in Gerald's eyes. "Do they?" he said. And he watched the other man critically. In a few minutes the train was running through the disgrace of outspread London. Everybody in the carriage was on the alert, waiting to escape. At last they were under the huge arch of the station, in the tremendous shadow of the town. Birkin shut himself together, he was in now. The two men went together in a taxi-cab. "Don't you feel like one of the damned?" asked Birkin, as they sat in a little, swiftly running enclosure, and watched the hideous great street. "No," laughed Gerald. "It is real death," said Birkin. Chapter 6. Crammed Amend. They met again in the cafe several hours later. Gerald went through the push doors into the large, lofty room where the faces and heads of the drinkers showed dimly through the haze of smoke, reflected more dimly, and repeated ad infinitum in the great mirrors on the walls, so that one seemed to enter a vague, dim world of shadowy drinkers humming within an atmosphere of blue tobacco smoke. There was, however, the red plush of the seats to give substance within the bubble of pleasure. Gerald moved in his slow, observant, glistening attentive motion down between the tables and the people whose shadowy faces looked up as he passed. He seemed to be entering in some strange element, passing into an illuminated new region, among a host of licentious souls. He was pleased, and entertained. He looked over all the dim, evanescent, strangely illuminated faces that bent across the tables. Then he saw Birkin rise and signal to him. At Birkin's table was a girl with dark, soft, fluffy hair cut short in the artist fashion, hanging level and full almost like the Egyptian princesses. She was small and delicately made, with warm coloring and large, dark hostile eyes. There was a delicacy, almost a beauty in all her form, and at the same time a certain attractive grossness of spirit, that made a little spark leap instantly alight in Gerald's eyes. Birkin, who looked muted, unreal, his presence left out, introduced her as Miss Darrington. She gave her hand with a sudden, unwilling movement, looking all the while at Gerald with a dark, exposed stare. A glow came over him as he sat down. The waiter appeared. Gerald glanced at the glasses of the other two. Birkin was drinking something green, Miss Darrington had a small liqueur glass that was empty save for a tiny drop. "Won't you have some more?" "Brandy," she said, sipping her last drop and putting down the glass. The waiter disappeared. "No," she said to Birkin. "He doesn't know I'm back. He'll be terrified when he sees me here." She spoke her R's like W's, lisping with a slightly babyish pronunciation which was at once affected and true to her character. Her voice was dull and toneless. "Where is he then?" asked Birkin. "He's doing a private show at Lady Snellgrove's," said the girl. "Warren's is there too." There was a pause. "Well, then," said Birkin, in a dispassionate protective manner, "what do you intend to do?" The girl paused sullenly. She hated the question. "I don't intend to do anything," she replied. "I shall look for some sittings tomorrow." "Who shall you go to?" asked Birkin. "I shall go to Bentley's first. But I believe he's angry with me for running away." "That is from the Madonna?" "Yes. And then if he doesn't want me, I know I can get work with Carmarthen." "Carmarthen?" "Lord Carmarthen, he does photographs. Chiffon and shoulders, yes. But he's awfully decent." There was a pause. "And what are you going to do about Julius?" he asked. "Nothing," she said. "I shall just ignore him." "You've done with him altogether?" But she turned aside her face sullenly, and did not answer the question. Another young man came hurrying up to the table. "Hello, Birkin." "Hello, Pussum, when did you come back?" he said eagerly. "Today." "Does Halliday know?" "I don't know." "I don't care either." "Ha ha. The wind still sits in that quarter, does it? Do you mind if I come over to this table? I'm talking to Rupert, do you mind? She replied, coolly and yet appealingly, like a child. Open confession, good for the soul, eh? Said the young man. Well, so long. And giving a sharp look at Birkin and at Gerald, the young man moved off, with a swing of his coat skirts. All this time Gerald had been completely ignored. And yet he felt that the girl was physically aware of his proximity. He waited, listened, and tried to piece together the conversation. Are you staying at the flat? The girl asked, of Birkin. For 3 days, replied Birkin. And you? I don't know yet. I can always go to Bertha's. There was a silence. Suddenly the girl turned to Gerald, and said, in a rather formal, polite voice, with the distant manner of a woman who accepts her position as a social inferior, yet assumes intimate camaraderie with the male she addresses, do you know London well? I can hardly say, he laughed. I've been up a good many times, but I was never in this place before. You are not an artist, then? She said, in a tone that placed him an outsider. No, he replied. He's a soldier, and an explorer, and a Napoleon of industry, said Birkin, giving Gerald his credentials for Bohemia. Are you a soldier? Asked the girl, with a cold yet lively curiosity. No, I resigned my commission, said Gerald, some years ago. He was in the last war, said Birkin. Were you really? Said the girl. And then he explored the Amazon, said Birkin, and now he is ruling over coal mines. The girl looked at Gerald with steady, calm curiosity. He laughed, hearing himself described. He felt proud too, full of male strength. His blue, keen eyes were lit up with laughter, his ruddy face, with its sharp fair hair, was full of satisfaction, and glowing with life. He piqued her. How long are you staying? She asked him. A day or two, he replied. But there is no particular hurry. Still she stared into his face with that slow, full gaze which was so curious and so exciting to him. He was acutely and delightfully conscious of himself, of his own attractiveness. He felt full of strength, able to give off a sort of electric power. And he was aware of her dark, hot-looking eyes upon him. She had beautiful eyes, dark, fully opened, hot, naked in there looking at him. And on them there seemed to float a film of disintegration, a sort of misery and sullenness, like oil on water. She wore no hat in the heated café, her loose, simple jumper was strung on a string round her neck. But it was made of rich peach-colored crepe de chine, that hung heavily and softly from her young throat and her slender wrists. Her appearance was simple and complete, really beautiful, because of her regularity and form, her soft dark hair falling full and level on either side of her head, her straight, small, softened features, Egyptian in the slight fullness of their curves, her slender neck and the simple, rich-colored smock hanging on her slender shoulders. She was very still, almost null, in her manner, apart and watchful. She appealed to Gerald strongly. He felt an awful, enjoyable power over her, an instinctive cherishing very near to cruelty. For she was a victim. He felt that she was in his power, and he was generous. The electricity was turgid and voluptuously rich, in his limbs. He would be able to destroy her utterly in the strength of his discharge. But she was waiting in her separation, given. They talked banalities for some time. Suddenly Birkin said, "There's Julius." And he half rose to his feet, motioning to the newcomer. The girl, with a curious, almost evil motion, looked round over her shoulder without moving her body. Gerald watched her dark, soft hair swing over her ears. He felt her watching intensely the man who was approaching, so he looked too. He saw a pale, full-built young man with rather long, solid fair hair hanging from under his black hat, moving cumbrously down the room, his face lit up with a smile at once naive and warm, and vapid. He approached towards Birkin, with a haste of welcome. It was not till he was quite close that he perceived the girl. He recoiled, went pale, and said, in a high squealing voice, "Pussum, what are you doing here?" The café looked up like animals when they hear a cry. Halliday hung motionless, an almost imbecile smile flickering palely on his face. The girl only stared at him with a black look in which flared an unfathomable hell of knowledge, and a certain impotence. She was limited by him. "Why have you come back?" repeated Halliday, in the same high, hysterical voice. "I told you not to come back." The girl did not answer, only stared in the same viscous, heavy fashion, straight at him, as he stood recoiled, as if for safety, against the next table. "You know you wanted her to come back, come and sit down," said Birkin to him. "No, I didn't want her to come back, and I told her not to come back." "What have you come for, Pussum?" "For nothing from you," she said in a heavy voice of resentment. "Then why have you come back at all?" cried Halliday, his voice rising to a kind of squeal. "She comes as she likes," said Birkin. "Are you going to sit down, or are you not?" "No, I won't sit down with Pussum," cried Halliday. "I won't hurt you, you needn't be afraid," she said to him, very curtly, and yet with a sort of protectiveness towards him, in her voice. Halliday came and sat at the table, putting his hand on his heart, and crying, "Oh, it's given me such a turn. Pussum, I wish you wouldn't do these things. Why did you come back?" "Not for anything from you," she repeated. "You've said that before," he cried in a high voice. She turned completely away from him, to Gerald Crich, whose eyes were shining with a subtle amusement. "Were you ever very much afraid of the savages?" she asked in her calm, dull childish voice. "No, never very much afraid. On the whole they're harmless, they're not born yet, you can't feel really afraid of them. You know you can manage them." "Do you really? Aren't they very fierce?" "Not very. There aren't many fierce things, as a matter of fact. There aren't many things, neither people nor animals, that have it in them to be really dangerous." "Except in herds," interrupted Birkin. "Aren't there really?" she said. "Oh, I thought savages were also dangerous, they'd have your life before you could look round." "Did you?" He laughed. "They are overrated, savages. They're too much like other people, not exciting, after the first acquaintance." "Oh, it's not so very wonderfully brave then, to be an explorer." "No. It's more a question of hardships than of terrors." "Oh. And weren't you ever afraid?" "In my life? I don't know. Yes, I'm afraid of some things, of being shut up, locked up anywhere, or being fastened. I'm afraid of being bound hand and foot." She looked at him steadily with her dark eyes, that rested on him and roused him so deeply, that it left his upper self quite calm. It was rather delicious, to feel her drawing his self-revelations from him, as from the very innermost dark marrow of his body. She wanted to know. And her dark eyes seemed to be looking through into his naked organism. He felt, she was compelled to him, she was fated to come into contact with him, must have the seeing him and knowing him. And this roused a curious exultance. Also he felt, she must relinquish herself into his hands, and be subject to him. She was so profane, slave-like, watching him, absorbed by him. It was not that she was interested in what he said, she was absorbed by his self-revelation, by him, she wanted the secret of him, the experience of his male being. Gerald's face was lit up with an uncanny smile, full of light and rousedness, yet unconscious. He sat with his arms on the table, his sun-browned, rather sinister hands, that were animal and yet very shapely and attractive, pushed forward towards her. And they fascinated her. And she knew, she watched her own fascination. Other men had come to the table, to talk with Birkin and Halliday. Gerald said in a low voice, apart, to Pussum, "Where have you come back from?" "From the country," replied Pussum, in a very low, yet fully resonant voice. Her face closed hard. Continually she glanced at Halliday, and then a black flare came over her eyes. The heavy, fair young man ignored her completely, he was really afraid of her. For some moments she would be unaware of Gerald. He had not conquered her yet. "And what has Halliday to do with it?" he asked, his voice still muted. She would not answer for some seconds. Then she said, unwillingly, He made me go and live with him, and now he wants to throw me over. And yet he won't let me go to anybody else. He wants me to live hidden in the country. And then he says I persecute him, that he can't get rid of me. Doesn't know his own mind, said Gerald. He hasn't any mind, so he can't know it, she said. He waits for what somebody tells him to do. He never does anything he wants to do himself, because he doesn't know what he wants. He's a perfect baby. Gerald looked at Halliday for some moments, watching the soft, rather degenerate face of the young man. Its very softness was an attraction. It was a soft, warm, corrupt nature, into which one might plunge with gratification. But he has no hold over you, has he? Gerald asked. You see, he made me go and live with him, when I didn't want to, she replied. He came and cried to me, tears, you never saw so many, saying he couldn't bear it unless I went back to him. And he wouldn't go away, he would have stayed forever. He made me go back. Then every time he behaves in this fashion. And now I'm going to have a baby. He wants to give me £100 and send me into the country, so that he would never see me nor hear of me again. But I'm not going to do it. After, a queer look came over Gerald's face. Are you going to have a child? He asked, incredulous. It seemed, to look at her, impossible. She was so young and so far in spirit from any childbearing. She looked full into his face, and her dark, inchoate eyes had now a furtive look, and a look of a knowledge of evil, dark and indomitable. A flame ran secretly to his heart. Yes, she said. Isn't it beastly? Don't you want it? He asked. I don't, she replied emphatically. But, he said, how long have you known? 10 weeks, she said. All the time she kept her dark, inchoate eyes full upon him. He remained silent, thinking. Then, switching off and becoming cold, he asked, in a voice full of considerate kindness, is there anything we can eat here? Is there anything you would like? Yes, she said, I should adore some oysters. All right, he said. We'll have oysters. And he beckoned to the waiter. Halliday took no notice, until the little plate was set before her. Then suddenly he cried, Pussum, you can't eat oysters when you're drinking brandy. What has it got to do with you? She asked. Nothing, nothing, he cried. But you can't eat oysters when you're drinking brandy. I'm not drinking brandy, she replied, and she sprinkled the last drops of her liquor over his face. He gave an odd squeal. She sat looking at him, as if indifferent. Pussum, why do you do that? He cried in panic. He gave Gerald the impression that he was terrified of her, and that he loved his terror. He seemed to relish his own horror and hatred of her, turn it over and extract every flavor from it, in real panic. Gerald thought him a strange fool, and yet piquant. But Pussum, said another man, in a very small, quick-eaten voice, you promised not to hurt him. I haven't hurt him, she answered. What will you drink? The young man asked. He was dark, and smooth-skinned, and full of a stealthy vigor. I don't like porter, Maxim, she replied. You must ask for champagne, came the whispering, gentlemanly voice of the other. Gerald suddenly realized that this was a hint to him. Shall we have champagne? He asked, laughing. Yes please, Dwi, she lisped childishly. Gerald watched her eating the oysters. She was delicate and finicking in her eating, her fingers were fine and seemed very sensitive in the tips, so she put her food apart with fine, small motions. She ate carefully, delicately. It pleased him very much to see her, and it irritated Birkin. They were all drinking champagne. Maxim, the prim young Russian with the smooth, warm-colored face and black, oiled hair was the only one who seemed to be perfectly calm and sober. Birkin was white and abstract, unnatural. Gerald was smiling with a constant bright, amused, cold light in his eyes, leaning a little protectively towards the Pussum, who was very handsome, and soft, unfolded like some red lotus in dreadful flowering nakedness, vainglorious now, flushed with wine and with the excitement of men. Halliday looked foolish. 1 glass of wine was enough to make him drunk and giggling. Yet there was always a pleasant, warm naivete about him that made him attractive. "I'm not afraid of anything except black beetles," said the Pussum, looking up suddenly and staring with her black eyes, on which there seemed an unseeing film of flame, fully upon Gerald. He laughed dangerously, from the blood. Her childish speech caressed his nerves, and her burning, filmed eyes, turned now full upon him, oblivious of all her antecedents, gave him a sort of license. "I'm not," she protested. "I'm not afraid of other things. But black beetles, ugh!" She shuddered convulsively, as if the very thought were too much to bear. "Do you mean," said Gerald, with the punctiliousness of a man who has been drinking, "that you are afraid of the sight of a black beetle, or you are afraid of a black beetle biting you, or doing you some harm?" "Do they bite?" cried the girl. "How perfectly loathsome!" exclaimed Halliday. "I don't know," replied Gerald, looking round the table. "Do black beetles bite? But that isn't the point. Are you afraid of their biting, or is it a metaphysical antipathy?" The girl was looking full upon him all the time with inchoate eyes. "Oh, I think they're beastly, they're horrid," she cried. "If I see one, it gives me the creeps all over. If one were to crawl on me, I'm sure I should die, I'm sure I should." "I hope not," whispered the young Russian. "I'm sure I should, Maxim," she asseverated. "Then one won't crawl on you," said Gerald, smiling and knowing. In some strange way he understood her. "It's metaphysical, as Gerald says," Birkin stated. There was a little pause of uneasiness. "And are you afraid of nothing else, Pussum?" asked the young Russian, in his quick, hushed, elegant manner. "Not really," she said. "I am afraid of some things, but not really the same. I'm not afraid of blood." "Not afraid of blood!" exclaimed a young man with a thick, pale, jeering face, who had just come to the table and was drinking whiskey. The Pussum turned on him a sulky look of dislike, low and ugly. "Aren't you really afraid of blood?" The other persisted, a sneer all over his face. "No, I'm not," she retorted. "Why, have you ever seen blood, except in a dentist's spittoon?" jeered the young man. "I wasn't speaking to you," she replied rather superbly. "You can answer me, can't you?" he said. For reply, she suddenly jabbed a knife across his thick, pale hand. He started up with a vulgar curse. "Shows what you are," said the Pussum in contempt. "Curse you," said the young man, standing by the table and looking down at her with acrid malevolence. "Stop that," said Gerald, in quick, instinctive command. The young man stood looking down at her with sardonic contempt, a cowed, self-conscious look on his thick, pale face. The blood began to flow from his hand. "Oh, how horrible, take it away!" squealed Halliday, turning green and averting his face. "Do you feel ill?" asked the sardonic young man, in some concern. "Do you feel ill, Julius?" "Garn, it's nothing, man. Don't give her the pleasure of letting her think she's performed a feat. Don't give her the satisfaction, man, it's just what she wants." "Oh!" squealed Halliday. "He's going to cat, Maxim," said the Pussum warningly. The suave young Russian rose and took Halliday by the arm, leading him away. Birkin, white and diminished, looked on as if he were displeased. The wounded, sardonic young man moved away, ignoring his bleeding hand in the most conspicuous fashion. "He's an awful coward, really," said the Pussum to Gerald. "He's got such an influence over Julius." "Who is he?" asked Gerald. "He's a Jew, really. I can't bear him." "Well, he's quite unimportant. But what's wrong with Halliday?" "Julius is the most awful coward you've ever seen," she cried. "He always faints if I lift a knife, he's too afraid of me." said Gerald. "They're all afraid of me," she said. "Only the Jew thinks he's going to show his courage. But he's the biggest coward of them all, really, because he's afraid what people will think about him, and Julius doesn't care about that. They've a lot of valor between them," said Gerald good-humoredly. The Pussum looked at him with a slow smile. She was very handsome, flushed, and confident in dreadful knowledge. Two little points of light glinted on Gerald's eyes. "Why do they call you Pussum, because you're like a cat?" he asked her. "I expect so," she said. The smile grew more intense on his face. "You are, rather, or a young, female panther." "Oh God, Gerald," said Birkin, in some disgust. They both looked uneasily at Birkin. "You are silent tonight, Rupert," she said to him, with a slight insolence, being safe with the other man. Halliday was coming back, looking forlorn and sick. "Pussum," he said, "I wish you wouldn't do these things." "Oh!" He sank in his chair with a groan. "You'd better go home," she said to him. "I will go home," he said. "But won't you all come along? Won't you come round to the flat?" he said to Gerald. "I should be so glad if you would." "Do, that'll be splendid. I say?" He looked round for a waiter. "Get me a taxi." Then he groaned again. "Oh, I do feel perfectly ghastly. Pussum, you see what you do to me." "Then why are you such an idiot?" she said with sullen calm. "But I'm not an idiot." "Oh, how awful. Do come, everybody, it will be so splendid." "Pussum, you are coming." "What?" "Oh, but you must come, yes, you must." "What?" "Oh, my dear girl, don't make a fuss now, I feel perfectly, oh, it's so ghastly, ho exclamation mark her. Oh. You know you can't drink," she said to him, coldly. "I tell you it isn't drink, it's your disgusting behavior, Pussum, it's nothing else." "Oh, how awful. Libednikov, do let us go." "He's only drunk one glass, only one glass," came the rapid, hushed voice of the young Russian. They all moved off to the door. The girl kept near to Gerald, and seemed to be at one in her motion with him. He was aware of this, and filled with demon satisfaction that his motion held good for two. He held her in the hollow of his will, and she was soft, secret, invisible in her stirring there. They crowded five of them into the taxi-cab. Halliday lurched in first, and dropped into his seat against the other window. Then the Pussum took her place, and Gerald sat next to her. They heard the young Russian giving orders to the driver, then they were all seated in the dark, crowded close together, Halliday groaning and leaning out of the window. They felt the swift, muffled motion of the car. The Pussum sat near to Gerald, and she seemed to become soft, subtly to infuse herself into his bones, as if she were passing into him in a black, electric flow. Her being suffused into his veins like a magnetic darkness, and concentrated at the base of his spine like a fearful source of power. Meanwhile her voice sounded out reedy and nonchalant, as she talked indifferently with Birkin and with Maxim. Between her and Gerald was this silence and this black, electric comprehension in the darkness. Then she found his hand, and grasped it in her own firm, small clasp. It was so utterly dark, and yet such a naked statement, that rapid vibrations ran through his blood and over his brain. He was no longer responsible. Still her voice rang on like a bell, tinged with a tone of mockery. And as she swung her head, her fine mane of hair just swept his face, and all his nerves were on fire, as with a subtle friction of electricity. But the great center of his force held steady, a magnificent pride to him, at the base of his spine. They arrived at a large block of buildings, went up in a lift, and presently a door was being opened for them by a Hindu. Gerald looked in surprise, wondering if he were a gentleman, one of the Hindus down from Oxford, perhaps. But no, he was the manservant. "Make tea, Hassan," said Halliday. "There is a room for me?" said Birkin. To both of which questions the man grinned, and murmured. He made Gerald uncertain, because, being tall and slender and reticent, he looked like a gentleman. "Who is your servant?" he asked of Halliday. "He looks a swell." "Oh yes, that's because he's dressed in another man's clothes. He's anything but a swell, really. We found him in the road, starving. So I took him here, and another man gave him clothes. He's anything but what he seems to be. His only advantage is that he can't speak English and can't understand it, so he's perfectly safe." "He's very dirty," said the young Russian swiftly and silently. Directly, the man appeared in the doorway. "What is it?" said Halliday. The Hindu grinned, and murmured shyly, "Want to speak to master." Gerald watched curiously. The fellow in the doorway was good-looking and clean-limbed, his bearing was calm, he looked elegant, aristocratic. Yet he was half a savage, grinning foolishly. Halliday went out into the corridor to speak with him. "What?" They heard his voice. "What? What do you say? Tell me again." "What? Want money. Want more money. But what do you want money for?" There was the confused sound of the Hindus talking, then Halliday appeared in the room, smiling also foolishly, and saying, "He says he wants money to buy underclothing. Can anybody lend me a shilling?" "Oh thanks, a shilling will do to buy all the underclothes he wants." He took the money from Gerald and went out into the passage again, where they heard him saying, "You can't want more money, you had 3 and 6 yesterday. You mustn't ask for any more. Bring the tea in quickly." Gerald looked round the room. It was an ordinary London sitting room in a flat, evidently taken furnished, rather common and ugly. But there were several Negro statues, wood carvings from West Africa, strange and disturbing. The carved Negroes looked almost like the fetus of a human being. One was a woman sitting naked in a strange posture, and looking tortured, her abdomen stuck out. The young Russian explained that she was sitting in childbirth, clutching the ends of the band that hung from her neck, one in each hand, so that she could bear down, and help labor. The strange, transfixed, rudimentary face of the woman again reminded Gerald of a fetus. It was also rather wonderful, conveying the suggestion of the extreme of physical sensation, beyond the limits of mental consciousness. "Aren't they rather obscene?" he asked, disapproving. "I don't know," murmured the other rapidly. "I have never defined the obscene. I think they are very good." Gerald turned away. There were 1 or 2 new pictures in the room. In the futurist manner, there was a large piano. And these, with some ordinary London lodging-house furniture of the better sort, completed the whole. The Pussum had taken off her hat and coat, and was seated on the sofa. She was evidently quite at home in the house, but uncertain, suspended. She did not quite know her position. Her alliance for the time being was with Gerald, and she did not know how far this was admitted by any of the men. She was considering how she should carry off the situation. She was determined to have her experience. Now, at this 11th hour, she was not to be balked. Her face was flushed as with battle, her eye was brooding but inevitable. The man came in with tea and a bottle of Kimmel. He set the tray on a little table before the couch. "Pussum," said Halliday, "pour out the tea." She did not move. "Won't you do it?" Halliday repeated, in a state of nervous apprehension. "I've not come back here as it was before," she said. "I only came because the others wanted me to, not for your sake. My dear Pussum, you know you are your own mistress. I don't want you to do anything but use the flat for your own convenience, you know it, I've told you so many times." She did not reply, but silently, reservedly reached for the teapot. They all sat round and drank tea. Gerald could feel the electric connection between him and her so strongly, as she sat there quiet and withheld, that another set of conditions altogether had come to pass. Her silence and her immutability perplexed him. How was he going to come to her? And yet he felt it quite inevitable. He trusted completely to the current that held them. His perplexity was only superficial, new conditions reigned, the old were surpassed. Here one did as one was possessed to do, no matter what it was. Birkin rose. It was nearly 1 o'clock. "I'm going to bed," he said. "Gerald, I'll ring you up in the morning at your place or you ring me up here." "Right," said Gerald, and Birkin went out. When he was well gone, Halliday said in a stimulated voice, to Gerald, "I say, won't you stay here, oh do." "You can't put everybody up," said Gerald. "Oh but I can, perfectly, there are 3 more beds besides mine, do stay, won't you? Everything is quite ready, there is always somebody here, I always put people up, I love having the house crowded." "But there are only 2 rooms," said the Pussum, in a cold, hostile voice, "now Rupert's here." I know there are only 2 rooms, said Halliday, in his odd, high way of speaking. But what does that matter? He was smiling rather foolishly, and he spoke eagerly, with an insinuating determination. Julius and I will share 1 room, said the Russian in his discreet, precise voice. Halliday and he were friends since Eton. It's very simple, said Gerald, rising and pressing back his arms, stretching himself. Then he went again to look at one of the pictures. Every one of his limbs was turgid with electric force, and his back was tense like a tiger's, with slumbering fire. He was very proud. The Pussum rose. She gave a black look at Halliday, black and deadly, which brought the rather foolishly pleased smile to that young man's face. Then she went out of the room, with a cold good night to them all generally. There was a brief interval, they heard a door close, then Maxim said, in his refined voice, "That's all right." He looked significantly at Gerald, and said again, with a silent nod, "That's all right, you're all right." Gerald looked at the smooth, ruddy, comely face, and at the strange, significant eyes, and it seemed as if the voice of the young Russian, so small and perfect, sounded in the blood rather than in the air. "I'm all right then," said Gerald. "Yes. Yes. You're all right," said the Russian. Halliday continued to smile, and to say nothing. Suddenly the Pussum appeared again in the door, her small, childish face looking sullen and vindictive. "I know you want to catch me out," came her cold, rather resonant voice. "But I don't care how much you catch me out." She turned and was gone again. She had been wearing a loose dressing gown of purple silk, tied round her waist. She looked so small and childish and vulnerable, almost pitiful. And yet the black looks of her eyes made Gerald feel drowned in some potent darkness that almost frightened him. The men lit another cigarette and talked casually. Chapter 7. Fetish. In the morning Gerald woke late. He had slept heavily. Pussum was still asleep, sleeping childishly and pathetically. There was something small and curled up and defenseless about her, that roused an unsatisfied flame of passion in the young man's blood, a devouring avid pity. He looked at her again. But it would be too cruel to wake her. He subdued himself, and went away. Hearing voices coming from the sitting room, Halliday talking to Lebednikov, he went to the door and glanced in. He had on a silk wrap of a beautiful bluish color, with an amethyst hem. To his surprise he saw the 2 young men by the fire, stark naked. Halliday looked up, rather pleased. "Good morning," he said. "Oh, did you want towels?" And stark naked he went out into the hall, striding a strange, white figure between the unliving furniture. He came back with the towels, and took his former position, crouching seated before the fire on the fender. "Don't you love to feel the fire on your skin?" he said. "It is rather pleasant," said Gerald. "How perfectly splendid it must be to be in a climate where one could do without clothing altogether," said Halliday. "Yes," said Gerald, "if there weren't so many things that sting and bite." "That's a disadvantage," murmured Maxim. Gerald looked at him, and with a slight revulsion saw the human animal, golden-skinned and bare, somehow humiliating. Halliday was different. He had a rather heavy, slack, broken beauty, white and firm. He was like a Christ in a Pietà. The animal was not there at all, only the heavy, broken beauty. And Gerald realized how Halliday's eyes were beautiful too, so blue and warm and confused, broken also in their expression. The fire glow fell on his heavy, rather bowed shoulders. He sat slackly crouched on the fender, his face was uplifted, weak, perhaps slightly disintegrate, and yet with a moving beauty of its own. "Of course," said Maxim, "you've been in hot countries where the people go about naked." "Oh really?" exclaimed Halliday. "Where?" "South America, Amazon," said Gerald. "Oh, but how perfectly splendid. It's one of the things I want most to do, to live from day to day without ever putting on any sort of clothing whatever. If I could do that, I should feel I had lived." "But why?" said Gerald. "I can't see that it makes so much difference." "Oh, I think it would be perfectly splendid. I'm sure life would be entirely another thing, Entirely different, and perfectly wonderful. But why? Asked Gerald. Why should it? Oh, one would feel things instead of merely looking at them. I should feel the air move against me, and feel the things I touched, instead of having only to look at them. I'm sure life is all wrong because it has become much too visual. We can neither hear nor feel nor understand, we can only see. I'm sure that is entirely wrong. Yes, that is true, said the Russian. Gerald glanced at him, and saw him, his suave, golden-colored body with the black hair growing fine and freely, like tendrils, and his limbs like smooth plant stems. He was so healthy and well-made. Why did he make one ashamed? Why did one feel repelled? Why should Gerald even dislike it? Why did it seem to him to detract from his own dignity? Was that all a human being amounted to? So uninspired, thought Gerald. Birkin suddenly appeared in the doorway, in white pajamas and wet hair, and a towel over his arm. He was aloof and white, and somehow evanescent. There's the bathroom now, if you want it, he said generally, and was going away again, when Gerald called, I say, Rupert. What? The single white figure appeared again, a presence in the room. What do you think of that figure there? I want to know, Gerald asked. Birkin, white and strangely ghostly, went over to the carved figure of the Negro woman in labor. Her nude, protuberant body crouched in a strange, clutching posture, her hands gripping the ends of the band, above her breast. It is art, said Birkin. Very beautiful, it's very beautiful, said the Russian. They all drew near to look. Gerald looked at the group of men, the Russian golden and like a water plant, Halliday tall and heavily, brokenly beautiful, Birkin very white and indefinite, not to be assigned, as he looked closely at the carven woman. Strangely elated, Gerald also lifted his eyes to the face of the wooden figure. And his heart contracted. He saw vividly with his spirit the gray, forward-stretching face of the Negro woman, African and tense, abstracted in utter physical stress. It was a terrible face, void, peaked, abstracted almost into meaninglessness by the weight of sensation beneath. He saw the bosom in it. As in a dream, he knew her. Why is it art? Gerald asked, shocked, resentful. It conveys a complete truth, said Birkin. It contains the whole truth of that state, whatever you feel about it. But you can't call it high art, said Gerald. High. There are centuries and hundreds of centuries of development in a straight line. Behind that carving, it is an awful pitch of culture, of a definite sort. What culture? Gerald asked, in opposition. He hated the sheer African thing. Pure culture in sensation, culture in the physical consciousness, really ultimate physical consciousness, mindless, utterly sensual. It is so sensual as to be final, supreme. But Gerald resented it. He wanted to keep certain illusions, certain ideas like clothing. You like the wrong things, Rupert, he said, things against yourself. Oh, I know, this isn't everything, Birkin replied, moving away. When Gerald went back to his room from the bath, he also carried his clothes. He was so conventional at home, that when he was really away, and on the loose, as now, he enjoyed nothing so much as full outrageousness. So he strode with his blue silk wrap over his arm and felt defiant. The bosom lay in her bed, motionless, her round, dark eyes like black, unhappy pools. He could only see the black, bottomless pools of her eyes. Perhaps she suffered. The sensation of her inchoate suffering roused the old sharp flame in him, a mordant pity, a passion almost of cruelty. You are awake now, he said to her. What time is it? Came her muted voice. She seemed to flow back, almost like liquid, from his approach, to sink helplessly away from him. Her inchoate look of a violated slave, whose fulfillment lies in her further and further violation, made his nerves quiver with acutely desirable sensation. After all, his was the only will, she was the passive substance of his will. He tingled with the subtle, biting sensation. And then he knew, he must go away from her, there must be pure separation between them. It was a quiet and ordinary breakfast, The four men all looking very clean and bathed. Gerald and the Russian were both correct and comme il faut in appearance and manner. Birkin was gaunt and sick, and looked a failure in his attempt to be a properly dressed man, like Gerald and Maxim. Halliday wore tweeds and a green flannel shirt, and a rag of a tie, which was just right for him. The Hindu brought in a great deal of soft toast, and looked exactly the same as he had looked the night before, statically the same. At the end of the breakfast the Pussum appeared, in a purple silk wrap with a shimmering sash. She had recovered herself somewhat, but was mute and lifeless still. It was a torment to her when anybody spoke to her. Her face was like a small, fine mask, sinister too, masked with unwilling suffering. It was almost midday. Gerald rose and went away to his business, glad to get out. But he had not finished. He was coming back again at evening. They were all dining together, and he had booked seats for the party, excepting Birkin, at a music hall. At night they came back to the flat very late again flushed with drink. Again the manservant, who invariably disappeared between the hours of 10 and 12 at night, came in silently and inscrutably with tea, bending in a slow, strange, leopard-like fashion to put the tray softly on the table. His face was immutable, aristocratic-looking, tinged slightly with grey under the skin. He was young and good-looking. But Birkin felt a slight sickness, looking at him, and feeling the slight greyness as a natural corruption, in the aristocratic inscrutability of expression and nauseating, bestial stupidity. Again they talked cordially and rousedly together. But already a certain friability was coming over the party. Birkin was mad with irritation. Halliday was turning in an insane hatred against Gerald. The Pussum was becoming hard and cold, like a flint knife, and Halliday was laying himself out to her. And her intention, ultimately, was to capture Halliday, to have complete power over him. In the morning they all stalked and lounged about again. But Gerald could feel a strange hostility to himself, in the air. It roused his obstinacy, and he stood up against it. He hung on for 2 more days. The result was a nasty and insane scene with Halliday on the 4th evening. Halliday turned with absurd animosity upon Gerald, in the café. There was a row. Gerald was on the point of knocking in Halliday's face, when he was filled with sudden disgust and indifference, and he went away, leaving Halliday in a foolish state of gloating triumph, the Pussum hard and established, and Maxim standing clear. Birkin was absent. He had gone out of town again. Gerald was piqued because he had left without giving the Pussum money. It was true, she did not care whether he gave her money or not, and he knew it. But she would have been glad of £10, and he would have been very glad to give them to her. Now he felt in a false position. He went away chewing his lips to get at the ends of his short-clipped mustache. He knew the Pussum was merely glad to be rid of him. She had got her Halliday whom she wanted. She wanted him completely in her power. Then she would marry him. She wanted to marry him. She had set her will on marrying Halliday. She never wanted to hear of Gerald again, unless, perhaps, she were in difficulty, because after all, Gerald was what she called a man, and these others, Halliday, Libidnikov, Birkin, the whole Bohemian set, they were only half men. But it was half men she could deal with. She felt sure of herself with them. The real men, like Gerald, put her in her place too much. Still, she respected Gerald, she really respected him. She had managed to get his address, so that she could appeal to him in time of distress. She knew he wanted to give her money. She would perhaps write to him on that inevitable rainy day,